In An Unkindness of Ghosts, unique characters and settings from a futuristic and imaginary society are explored in order to provide a way to examine current matters surrounding gender identity and expression. But first, let's discuss where we are and who we are investigating. The lower decks on the Matilda are inhabited by people of darker complexion, which in their society means low class and low status. Most of the lower decks function without heat because the people in charge decided they deserved an unsustainable and cold environment. It is worth noting two decks, the Q deck and the T deck. On the Q deck, where Aster is from, everyone is referred to with feminine she/her pronouns. Aster says that all children are referred to as girls, and all people are assumed to be women unless they make a statement saying otherwise or present other obvious signs in the form of fashion or occupation choice. On the T deck, everyone is referred to with neutral they/them pronouns. They function differently to what Aster is used to, so when she has a patient on the T deck, she catches herself messing up the pronouns once because she's not used to the culture of the other decks. Aster is a character that lives in the lower decks and is an example of someone in the lower deck who experiences gender differently to what is considered the Western standard. Firstly, she is gender non-conforming. She has a muscular build, is hairier than most women, and enjoys short hair. When she first got her hair cut, she said that she was, quote, happy with herself, that the haircut had, quote, unlatched and freed her. Having short hair gave her confidence. Aside from her appearance, she also asked Theo to perform gender-affirming surgeries like a hysterectomy and double mastectomy for her, so she also had those done to feel more comfortable in herself. Secondly, when she and Theo go up to one of the high decks to attend the coronation of the new sovereign, she has to dress and act like a man for an evening. She becomes Aston in order to safely attend this ceremony. But during the night, she begins to think about what it would be like in, quote, a different sort of life, one in which a man named Aston and a man named Theo were lovers, and then had to remind herself that this world was not possible. The high and mid decks of the Matilda are inhabited by people of lighter to white skin, which in their society correlates to a higher class and status. And contrary to the lower decks, the high and mid decks generally have no issues with their environment and living conditions. In relation to gender, these decks function along more of a gender binary than lower decks, and as far as we know, there are no decks like the Q or T deck in the high deck area that operate on different gender values than what is considered the norm. It seems that most people in this region of the ship reject any sort of queerness. They make no notions to celebrate nor tolerate queerness, with the exception of Theo. Theo expresses himself in a way that is outside the norm to others, but comfortable for himself. He says, however, that he is tolerated by his deckmates and some of the higher status individuals because of his holy status as the Surgeon General. Despite only being tolerated, he is still treated like an outcast and experiences harassment from others, for instance when some of the guards decided to be disrespectful and call him slurs. Theo is a character that lives around the mid to high deck area of Matilda, and is an example of someone in this area who experiences gender differently to what is considered the Western standard. Firstly, he is also gender non-conforming in that he keeps himself clean-shaven, wears earrings, and puts makeup on, all of which are seen as unnatural or odd to the others in this area. Granted, he insists that the earrings and makeup are religious, however, it is implied that it is also tied to the way he wants to express his gender and makes him comfortable in doing so. Secondly, he doesn't go by the name his parents picked out for him. Instead, he chose the name Theo for himself. In conversation with others, he implies that this choice of name was because of religious obsession, but it's likely that he chose the name because he heard it once as the name of a female character and decided to adopt it as his own since it was still a pretty gender neutral or even stereotypically a guy's name. So how does it relate? How do these characters in the setting of an imaginary and futuristic society relate to experiences of gender today? Firstly, to define some important key terms, according to the American Psychological Association, gender is the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. Gender identity is a component of gender that describes a person's psychological sense of their gender. Gender expression is an individual's presentation, including physical appearance, clothing choice, and accessories, and behaviors that communicate aspects of gender and gender role. And finally, genderfuck is seeking to subvert traditional gender binary by mixing or bending one's gender expression, identity, or presentation. The two characters mentioned previously, as well as the separation between the high and low decks, all represent different facets of gender and gender identity that are experienced today. Theo's experience as a gender non-conforming individual might parallel someone who is in the situation where they can't fully come out because it might be unsafe to do so, but do things like present differently just in a way that is subtle enough to not be caught. Theo, living in higher decks, exists in a space which is unforgiving towards queerness, so in order to have some semblance of comfort in his gender expression, he does little things subtly, like wearing makeup and jewelry, disguised and hidden behind his obsession for religion. Some queer folks today who may live in unsafe conditions to come out may also act similarly to Theo in presenting a certain way that allows them to experience and explore their gender safely and comfortably, whether it's makeup under the guise of religion or dressing in neutral clothes or something else. No matter what it might be, their actions are able to not only provide the individual with the ability to achieve their desired level of genderfuck, but also be safely hidden away or disguised from harassment and harm from others. Aster's experience as a gender nonconforming individual might parallel someone who is comfortable in what society expects from them, but then finds out they're also comfortable presenting the opposite way of societal expectations. Aster, living in the lower decks, grows up in a culture that is more accepting of queer bodies than that of the higher decks, so she's able to present in a way that she wants to and finds comfortable, which for her was presenting as a woman. Living on Q deck, most of the other people from her deck were women, which allowed her to express herself both as a woman and as a gender nonconforming individual like she wanted to. However, as the novel progresses, Aster finds that she's also comfortable presenting as the male version of herself, Aston. She finds particular joy in having her hair cut short, similar to how a man would have his hair cut. She also begins to dream about what it would be like to be lovers with Theo, but as two men. This particular dream is interesting as it parallels this idea that some young queer AFAB individuals express that they desire the ability to express their love in the way that men love men. Overall, though, Aster's experience here may be similar to that of some queer folks today who may be comfortable presenting as and whose gender aligns with their assigned sex at birth, but find out in some way that they are also comfortable presenting in a way that aligns more with the opposite sex and begin to question or explore their gender identity in a different way, through different haircuts or clothing choices or other things. They, much like Aster throughout the novel, explore different ways of expressing their gender and begin to achieve a level of genderfuck that they are content and comfortable with. The high decks seem to function along a gender binary more than some of the lower decks do. They tend to reject any sort of queerness, an example of this being the guards, who are presumed to possess mid to high status coming from the higher decks, harassing Theo, a visibly queer individual, or as he puts it, an anomaly. He is called slurs because of his different looks. These values and norms of the higher deck pretty closely resemble many cultures and societies in the West, and most certainly in the United States, whose views on gender fit a binary of male and female. Due to social influence, individuals are expected to follow this traditional gender model wherein an individual who is assigned male at birth will have a gender identity that is assumed to be a man and possess masculine gender roles, and the same vice versa for people assigned female at birth. In these societies, gendered behaviors and roles are typically maintained by individuals in order to avoid judgment from others due to deviating from the norms and standards of the individual's assigned sex. This fear of judgment thus causes the adherence to gender norms, and as a result, these societies, both existing today in the US and fictitiously on the high decks of Matilda, are able to construct, maintain, and legitimize a gender binary within their respective cultures. Some of the lower decks are built upon a society that emphasizes gender binary significantly less. The Q and T decks mentioned prior are examples of how the extreme separation and isolation of the lower decks from the higher decks has caused different cultures to emerge within the Matilda. Within different cultures comes different ways of interpreting and presenting gender identity. As such, the ideas about gender within these lower decks parallels the way in which other cultures and communities experience gender differently to the gender norms and expressions that are considered standard in the West. One instance of this is found within Native American communities, who also define two-spirit as a term that encompasses a broad range of gender identities for individuals who do not fit within the gender binary. This term can be found as a way to refer to the cultural roles of individuals who embody both female and male spirits, but also used as a label for queer Native Americans. Many indigenous languages also have their own terms to describe individuals who are neither male nor female, but are hard to translate to English due to the words being descriptors about one's role in their respective spiritual and cultural systems and how that intertwines with their gender identities. As such, these people who identify as two-spirit have special places in their society. Their social position typically either comprises of the work of the opposite sex or incorporates a combination of the work done by both men and women in their tribes. In these tribes, they also fill a special religious role as healers or ceremonial leaders, being held to a high status, much like Theo is like on the Matilda. Ultimately, whether it's the separation of native cultures from the US or the low decks from the high decks on the Matilda, different ways of expressing and identifying gender exist in these cultures that are isolated from what is considered to be the social norm.